Good evening, everyone. I see we have about 40 people here already, and I know we have a few more, but we're going to get started. Thank you, Leah, for letting people into the waiting room. I'm Lori Salganikoff with the Chestnut Hill Conservancy, an educational center and advocate for the architecture, open space, and history of Chestnut Hill and surrounding communities in the Wissahickon watershed. Tonight, we are proud to present the virtual lecture, WPA Structures in the Wissahickon. WPA, of course, being the Works Progress Administration. During the Great Depression, the WPA funded many projects in Fairmount Park, including the construction of some of our favorite Wissahickon outbuildings. And we're going to hear about that this evening. I'm really excited to hear that. Also, mark your calendars for the related in-person walking tour of WPA structures by the legendary Bob Thomas. Is Bob on yet? Did he hear me say that?
He's there. He's here.
Yay! Bob's awesome. Gives an amazing tour. That is on June 24th with a June 30th rain date. We'll be doing a loop for that walking tour, starting from Rittenhouse Town up to Bluebell and back, the Conservancy with Friends of the Wissahickon. It's a wonderful educational hike that might be harder for anyone with mobility challenges, so keep that in mind. Tonight's lecture and much of our work this year is made possible by our generous members and supporters. The Conservancy's lead sponsor for 2021, BMT, Bryn Mawr Trust, and the presenting sponsor for this lecture series, John B. Ward and Company Arborists. So thank you so much. I'm also proud to thank SOMD Architects, the George Woodward Company, Milan Architects, the Nottingham Goodman Group of Merrill Lynch, Bowman Properties, Dennis F. Meyer Incorporated, and Friends of the Wissahickon for their support of the Conservancy through 2020. Yourself. We invite you to add any questions you have during the program in the chat for the moderated Q&A that will follow the lecture. I hope everyone here is a member of the Conservancy and that you are also members of our partners in tonight's lecture and in our work to protect the Wissahickon watershed, FOW, Friends of the Wissahickon. I will now turn the unmute button over to Ruffian Tittman, the remarkable executive director of FOW, for a brief welcome. And then the Conservancy's program co-chair, Jean McCoubry, will introduce tonight's program and our wonderful speaker, Kate Cowing. Ruffian?
Dearest and oldest partners. And Lori's been a great friend to me for a long time, and certainly in my first year as executive director. Our organizations work so closely together on both conservation of green space in and surrounding the Wissahickon, and also in recognizing some of the great structures that we have in the Wissahickon that we've been thrilled to be championed for various awards for our work, preserving historic structures together. And I'm just really grateful that we're here tonight and that so many people are here 7 o'clock on Zoom after Zooming probably all week and all day. This is a great topic and we have a wonderful speaker. I'm thrilled that everyone's going to get to hear Kate. I've read her paper several years ago. And so I'm going to be brief as advised and turn this over to Jean McCoubry and have everyone listen to this great talk and then hopefully get out in the park with Bob Thomas, which will be a real treat. I've had the opportunity to do so with him recently and everyone else should as well.
Hi, I'm Jean McCoubry and Susan Peck and I are the current co-chairs of the Conservancy's Programs Committee. And so we plan various talks and tours every year, and it's been kind of interesting to do this all virtually. There are a lot of silver linings to doing it virtually, and that we're getting a lot of people attending, which is great. The good news is that the actual tour will be real in person, led by Bob Thomas on June 24th. Kate Cowing is someone that I track down because someone told me that you WPA structures of the Wissahickon. So that led me to her thesis, which I found online, and then we talked, and here she is. Kate is both an architect and an architectural conservator and a registered architect. She has more than 25 years of experience in preservation architecture, and her firm is Kate Cowing Architect. In addition to running her own firm, she teaches in the architecture department at Temple currently. She got her B Arch from Drexel and her historic preservation master's from the University of Pennsylvania. And this presentation is based on her graduate school thesis, which she did on the WPA outbuildings of the Wissahickon Valley. And if she wants to give you any more details about her background, Kate, you're welcome to do that. Thank you all for coming, and please keep adding your questions to the chat room, and I'll try to organize them into logical groups for a Q&A session after Kate presents. Thank you. Okay, Kate.
Thank you, Jean. Right, I don't think
Could you speak up a
so-
little bit?
oh, sure.
Thank you.
Maybe if I move my computer closer. Is that better? Anybody better?
I think it's a little louder.
A
Okay.
little bit.
Is it a problem? All right. So tonight's presentation is ultimately going to focus on one project that the WPA did in the Wissahickon, but I'm going to cover a lot of background before we get there. And that includes many other projects that were done by work relief organizations and the factors that led up to this particular project happening. There we go. All right, so this is a map of the Wissahickon. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. I'm gonna bore you a little bit at first with stuff you probably know, but just in case there's somebody out there that doesn't, the Wissahickon Valley Park is 7 miles long and over 1,400 acres. The valley itself is a very steeply wooded, going down to the creek. There are some sort of flatter areas, but if you envision this without Forbidden Drive, those edges of that hillside are incredibly steep. And that's important to think about because this is the only access people had until the mid-19th century. So there were lots of areas that were inaccessible by anything but a little footpath. So the Wissahickon was a tourist destination with a reputation as strong as Niagara Falls. People came from internationally to come see it. And in 1964, it was actually designated one of the very first national natural landmarks. So these are some modern landmarks to be able to recognize where we are on this map. So part of the thing that the Wissahickon was known for in the very early 19th century is those big gaps of rural that weren't accessible, and it attracted artists, and poets, authors, including the likes of, this is Joshua Shaw, Thomas Moran, James Peel, Currier and Ives, Edgar Allan Poe, and the woman credited for giving it international fame was Fanny Kemble, who wrote about it in a journal, and she was an English woman, wrote about it in her journal in 1835. She was a quite a famous actress and writer in the early 19th century. So here we are back at that map, and the reality is the Wissahickon, even at this time where it was a massive tourist attraction, was covered with buildings. These stars represent building sites, not individual buildings. It had a massive amount of mills that had multiple buildings on their site. In 1826, a boulder was removed, which made the upper and lower Wissahickon accessible to each other. Well, I don't know, removed is probably the wrong word, it was destroyed. And the upper Wissahickon is what we're going to be talking about. The lower Wissahickon is where Lincoln Drive is. So in 1856, now that boulder had been cleared, people, wealthy people in the area who owned property took a existing footpath and created the Wissahickon Turnpike, which is now what we call Forbidden Drive. Despite the popularity amongst tourists, this is what they were looking at in many instances. Mills were kind of a curiosity for people who were in the city, so it didn't bother them to come and this tourist attraction with mills in it. And as I said, each one of these mill sites had many different buildings. But then there were also hotels. Because of all the tourists, these hotels built up along what is now Lincoln Drive and along Forbidden Drive. The top is the Indian Rock Hotel, the top corner. The bottom corner is Valley Green Inn, when it was known as Valley Green Hotel. And then the one on the left is the infamous log cabin, which was known for having wild animals, including 2 bears set up on leashes next to it so you could go stare at the bears. It was known for people celebrating and drinking a lot and then taking canoes out on the Wissahickon afterwards. And all of these hotels or inns were known for their catfish and waffle dinners. And catfish and waffles was apparently a huge Philadelphia thing, but these hotels were known specifically for it. It consisted of fried catfish with pepper hash, fried potatoes, beef steaks, fried or stewed chicken, and lightly salted and buttered waffles, and could be enjoyed any time of the day or night. It was not a dinner, it was a meal. So when the Fairmount Park started buying properties in 1868, they had these more than 50 buildings to contend with. They tore down a fair number of the mills, not all of them. Some of them just fell by the wayside from neglect. And they didn't actually initially tear down the hotels, but they forbade liquor sales in Fairmount Park. So that was kind of end to the hotels naturally. So this is a view that I like these 2 views. They're pre-1920. And this top one, you can see the horse-drawn carriage running along what is now Forbidden Drive. And the bottom one, you see somebody in an automobile. That one's 1901. And that's because, as I said, most of you probably know this, but in 1924, the turnpike was closed to vehicular traffic, and the nickname Forbidden Drive was given. So one of the factors, this is going to seem like a wild offshoot, but one of the factors that led up to this WPA project was the development of Chestnut Hill, which was started in the late 19th century with Henry Houston taking advantage of the new train line and wanting to build a streetcar suburb. And then his son-in-law, Senator George Woodward, took that on after Henry Houston passed away. Woodward believed in affordable housing. He wanted to build a place for impoverished people. He was very involved with that downtown. However, when it came time to actually putting people in these houses he built, they were pretty much all middle class. But regardless, it gave Chestnut Hill a huge variety of buildings or housing. So, but one of the things about these buildings is they're all of, or most are of Wissahickon schist, at least partially. So they needed stone workers. George Woodward in particular actually recruited people, Italian masons from one town. Well, there was probably more than one town, but many people from one town left and came to Chestnut Hill to build these Woodward and Houston buildings. Then between 1890 and 1930, more than half of the town of, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Pofabro, Italy, left and moved to Chestnut Hill. The upper right-hand side is Pofabro. And then these are some of the masons. They needed to learn how to work with schist, but they learned that pretty quickly. It's very different than the marble that they were used to working with. And some of them even opened quarries. There were several quarries that were owned by people from this town. So another one of the factors of this project was that at the turn of the 20th century, parks in general, there was a park reform movement. And parks, naturalistic parks where people go and think and stare at nature, romanticize, was no longer acceptable according to the federal government, basically, or the trends. They started to recognize that people trapped in the inner city actually needed exercise, not just sitting and contemplating. So the parks reform movement, and this is a national movement, advocated that all parks in cities should have ball fields, golf courses, picnic tables, or picnic areas, tennis courts, and playground, as well as refreshment stands and comfort stations. So these images are of new playgrounds from the 1910s, 1920s. Between 1925 and 1928, a federal organization took a look at municipal parks all over the country and found that most of them had added these playgrounds and swimming pools and tennis courts. But they specifically called out Philadelphia as being one that hadn't made the transition yet. They very publicly embarrassed us. So then, of course, if you're talking about the WPA, you have to talk about the Depression. When the Great Depression hit, the residents of Chestnut Hill were started doing make work projects on their own properties and around town so that these masons would have something to do. They recognized that they brought these people over to work, and now that there isn't really work, they felt kind of responsible, rightfully so. So a lot of the stone walls and beautiful schist gates, various schist outbuildings that you see around Chestnut Hill were actually make work projects that residents came up with to keep these people employed. Unfortunately, that didn't last long, and people started having to depend on make work projects. I mean, sorry, actual relief programs. So I'm going to quickly divert into telling you the difference between the CCC and the WPA, because a lot of people use them interchangeably, and they're actually very different. The CCC, which is you see over on the left-hand side, is they took unskilled labor, usually young men, and brought them out to camps in the middle of nowhere to work on parks, not necessarily the middle of nowhere, but away from their family, and taught them the skills for whatever project they were working on. They lived in these big camps, and they sent their money home to their family, and they got job skills. The WPA, on the other hand, and the programs that were like it, that the predecessors to it, were to employ men who had skills. And they had skills, had families, needed to be at home. And the part of the theory was that if these men are working where they live, somebody may see their work and understand how good an employee they would make and hire them. Of course, the Depression was pretty, as everybody knows, pretty bad. So that, I'm not sure that was actually a incentive to hire people, or that actually worked. So the CCC ran from 1933 to 1942. The WPA actually came after a whole bunch of other work projects, work relief programs. And in Fairmount Park, those include the Lloyd Committee from 1931 to 32, the Civil Works Administration from 33 to 34, the LWA, which is the Local Works Administration from 34 to 35, and then the WPA finally kicked in 35. So a lot of the work that we see in Fairmount Park in general and in the Wissahickon in particular isn't necessarily WPA. It may be one of these earlier relief programs. Part of the method of getting the WPA project is somebody has to write a proposal for a project, submit it to the federal government, then that individual, which it was sometimes, or government, was then the sponsor for those programs. And the sponsor was required to pay 10% of the cost. This is not in the Wissahickon, but it's somewhere in Fairmount Park. So Fairmount Park found this really, really helpful. You know, I mean, Fairmount Park was underfunded even way back then. And in 1931 to 32, they had 500 men from a work relief program working on staff with the staff. The staff hadn't been laid off. The chief engineer's report from 1932 talks about the park being in better shape than it ever had been because they had all these extra hands helping out. But in 1933, the budget was cut by $100,000, and the park requested 200 and close to 300 men from one of the work relief programs to help out. In 1934, it got even worse, and the park staff was furloughed, only allowed to work 12 days a week, or sorry, 12 days a month. And in 1935, the Local Works Administration took over as well because the situation wasn't getting any better. The things that were completed by these early relief programs in the Wissahickon included landscaping, installing telephones at any existing buildings, the repair of the Bluestone Bridge guard shelter or guard box, building the Rittenhouse Town Wall, installing bathrooms at Valley Green, and making a bunch of bridle paths and beginning the Walnut Lane Golf Course. Senator Woodward and many of the wealthy Chestnut Hill residents donated money and materials and even land to get these projects happening. So this is the first construction project that the WPA completed. It was actually started, or the whole project was started before the WPA, but then those programs turned into the WPA. And this is building the Harper's Meadow picnic shelter and picnic area. It's 1935 to 1937, WPA continued in the Wissahickon, spending in those 2 years, spending over over $1 million, which is currently about $18 million. These group, or the WPA during this time, created more bridle paths, continued the construction of the Walnut Lane Golf Course, brought electricity and plumbing to the monastery complex, and renovated Wissahickon Hall and Valley Green Inn. Then ultimately, the start of the project we're going to talk about began with, in 1937, with Mrs. Frances Ballard of Chestnut Hill. She put together a proposal for a small project in the Wissahickon, essentially to continue bridle paths, and she hired a landscape architect to come up with the plans. But it was, you know, she felt her responsibility to continue helping the stonemasons. So the city felt that this initial project, this proposal was too small, so they bolstered it up. They wanted to have, they wanted to meet the parks reform movement. So they proposed a massive project with picnic shelters, toilet buildings, guard shelters, and it was presented to the public on November 1st of 1937. But before we leave this photograph, I want people to pay attention to how rigid, if you will, the structure is. You know, the stones are tooled very evenly, and it's a very formal building. Even the little fire pit on the bottom right is pretty formal. So Philadelphia's grand plans for the Wissahickon did not go over well. The newspapers berated it. These are members of the Friends of the Wissahickon. This is Mrs. Frances Ballard. Really, really upset. The project was called the General Improvement of the Wissahickon, or to the Wissahickon, and it was the second largest project proposed in the entire park throughout the whole Depression. It was supposed to cost about $833,000, which is $15.5 million today, and was to include planting, I'm going to give you a long list here, planting 1,168 trees, 10,000 plants, quarrying and repairing 3 dams with 6,000 cubic yards of masonry, building 200 rest seats and 80 rustic benches, seeding and installing a water line for the golf course, 14,675 cable safety fences, 600 picnic benches, redressing footwalks, 16,000 bridle paths, almost 500 cubic yards of retaining walls. I'm gonna skip up here to the part that got people upset. Baseball fields, 6 tennis courts, 3 baseball backstops, and here we go, 10 picnic areas, establishing, like, creating new lawn areas, 12 toilet buildings, 12 shelters, and 4 large shelters. Some of these including concession stands. So the landscape part was not controversial at all, and it started right away. Nobody complained about it one bit. But the 12 toilet buildings, 12 shelters, and 4 large shelters, 10 picnic areas created this controversy. People were upset that the Wissahickon was going to lose its beautiful natural landscape, which we should remember was only constructed 60 years before. So there's some great quotes in these articles. Senator George Woodward, representing the Friends of the Wissahickon, said, "We are opposed to erecting any sort of shelter in the valley. Such structures would lose its naturalistic appearance and give the semblance of an amusement park. We think the plans are rotten." And Judge McDevitt of the Saddle Horse Association said that the plans are sacrilegious and disgraceful. So the park had a secret meeting with they gave these drawings out to the general public, and then had a secret meeting with the Friends of the Wissahickon to talk about what would resolve their issues. You know, I keep referring to the people in Chestnut Hill as helping all of this, helping the stonemasons, but mostly those people in Chestnut Hill were Friends of the Wissahickon, which was established, I should say, established during the rallies against having cars on Forbidden Drive. So they were in there for 10 or 15 years already before, you know, they were a well-established organization before this came up. So the city met with the Friends of the Wissahickon, and they resolved their differences in the middle of November, honing the thing down to a total of 10 buildings and 3 picnic areas. They have 3 guard shelters, 3 toilet buildings, 3 picnic shelters, and 2 unique trail end buildings. So these buildings are what I'm going to focus on. I don't know the extent of the landscaping. I mean, I know they probably managed to fulfill all that they were proposing, but that was not part of my study. And actually, I should add that records for the WPA are very hard to come by. So it was not through want of searching. So between Harper's Meadow picnic structure and the little buildings along Forbidden Drive that were part of our project, the National Park Service had come up with guidelines for building park structures. They published in 1937, they published a large book full of examples of buildings in the park. And it's clear that our WPA buildings were, the precedent of it was this book. And this is the difference between the Harper's Meadow structure and the other structures, the following structures, because the Harper's Meadow structure was very, you know, uniform and rigid and formal, and that's absolutely counter to what the National Park Service wanted. So the book showed sample plans to give the designers ideas. They were not to cut and paste because every building was to be designed to its individual site. So even the Wissahickon, they weren't supposed to design one thing for the entire Wissahickon. Everything was to be adapted to its individual site. All the structures were to have harmony and scale with the surroundings and use materials from the surrounding areas. There are some great quotes in this too. Nothing is more indicative of an improper sense of values in the park technique than the frequently expressed determination to make a feature of the building. In other words, the buildings are supposed to blend in with the environment. A cluster of buildings shall be avoided when possible. Multiple uses should be provided under one roof. This is based on the belief that localizing of infection is preferable to an irritating rash of trivial structures. And then lastly, when a truly inappropriate style of architecture already exists in the park where the new work is being contemplated, it is urged that the new building does not stubbornly carry on the old tradition. So besides the funny quotes, they did have some direct instructions. You're to screen buildings with existing plants and other features. You're only to use local materials of the size and scale appropriate to your individual site. You're to use only warm colors such as browns and grays, and absolutely not to use green, which of course is kind of ironic for anybody who's ever worked with the National Park Service, because there's a color we all joke about calling Park Service green. But this book said no green. Local stone should be used, but never tooled to regularity in size or surface. And logs shall be natural, not poles or commercial lumber. Quote, there is nothing aesthetically beautiful in a pole. So in this image, this is obviously a toilet building. In this image, look on this top left photograph and notice the clay pipes, because we'll see that again. They were installed instead of windows, so they couldn't be broken, but you could have privacy and ventilation in a toilet building. So they gave samples of just about anything you can think of that's supposed to be in a park. Bridges, culverts, and also they admitted that this was not a park structure. This was actually there before the park was there, which is also how the Wissahickons, most of the Wissahickons bridges are, if not all of the Wissahickons bridges are. They prescribed what kind of benches you have, or suggested, I shouldn't say prescribed, fences, fire pits. There were dozens, pages and pages of fire pits, different styles of stairs, whatever gives you an idea of what to do with your site. So these are our buildings. And I left the thesis era drawing in or map in because I just thought it was kind of funny, the technology change. The first thing that I noticed when I did this was that every one of our buildings is on a previously cleared site. Before my thesis, nobody had actually even mapped these buildings. Nobody knew where they were. Nobody knew the extent of where they were supposed to be, like if there were some missing or not. And luckily, one of the people who helped me out on my thesis was a man named Chris Palmer, who at the time was the director of the Wissahickon district for Fairmount Park, but he also grew up in Roxborough, and he had explored these woods throughout his childhood. I mean, I shouldn't be talking about him in past tense because he's very much alive, but he was instrumental in me being able to map these buildings, because the red ones all still exist, but the green ones were gone. And because of his knowledge of the Wissahickon, I was able to see these, well, this site's very obvious, but see these sites, the Gorgas Lane Comfort Station, the Walnut Lane Comfort Station, and the Walnut Lane Picnic Shelter. We saw the ruins of those, which I quite certain I wouldn't have found myself. So what I'm showing here is the map we looked at before, admittedly in the, you know, turned 90 degrees, comparing to this, you know, this Wissahickon trail map from 1978. So up at the Bells Mill structure was Bishop's Mill, and that's where they were constructed. The McGargy, one of the two McGargy mills, their building was turned into a comfort station, and that's the Thomas Mill Comfort Station, and that's over the covered bridge. If you walk over the covered bridge, there's a little picnic area there. The Rex Avenue buildings, which is a comfort station and a guard box, were where the now I'm trying to remember, the Indian Rock Hotel was there. So they're right across from the Indian sculpture. The second McGargy Mill site, they reused one of its buildings for a comfort station. Then as we move down the map, we pass Valley Green Inn, and the Gorgas Mill site had the Gorgas Mill Comfort Station. And reusing buildings was quite important to the WPA as well. So when they found these buildings in spots where they needed them, that was perfect. Then the Allens Lane guard box was at Livesey Mill, and the Kitchens Lane guard box and various structures were at Kitchens Mill, unsurprisingly. And the Lincoln Drive 10 box, as well as the Bluebell Shelter, were both as part of Rittenhouse Town. Oh, and the Rittenhouse Town barn was another reuse. So here are two remaining reuse buildings. The other, the Gorgas Mill is gone. But the Rittenhouse Town barn, it's described as being taken down and rebuilt, according to the footprint of what was already there. And I'm sure they had other evidence as well, because there are historic photos of the earlier one, and it is pretty dead on. And then the Thomas Mill Comfort Station was, you can see those clay pipes that I commented on in the National Park Service stuff. That had been turned into a storage building by an earlier work relief program, and the WPA turned it into comfort station as well as storage. And then our two individual entry buildings, which is part of the National Park Service's guidelines, were, of course, Bells Mill guard box and the Lincoln Drive guard box, or structure, I should say, which is otherwise known as 10 box. The fun story about the 10 box, I shouldn't overlook Bells Mill structure. It was only a guard box. There wasn't other accessories in there. But the Lincoln Drive structure actually had men's and women's toilet rooms, a guard shelter, as well as a storage room. And as you can see here, the storage room has turned into a bicycle concession shop. And what happened there was, while this, or right after this was constructed, the park went out and advertised for concessions for bicycle rentals. And apparently there was somebody who'd been doing it for years in the Wissahickon, but he had built all his structures. Well, he lost the bid and tore down all of the structures he'd built. So when the guy who won the concession said, "Oh, but I bid on that, assuming I could have those structures," the park then gave him 10 bucks to rent his bicycles out of. So the Bluebell picnic area, our Bluebell picnic shelter, is one of the one of 3 picnic shelters. There was one, or there is one at Bell's Mill, which is much smaller. It's just posts and a roof. And then there was a almost matching one of these over in Walnut Lane Golf Course. And you can see the similarity with this building and the Park Service image up on the right-hand side. The interesting thing is that, well, so these are up out of the valley, they're up on the hills. So they're a bit bigger and take up a bit more space. So they have a fireplace, they have, they both had toilet buildings and storage in them, as well as the picnic area. The one in Walnut Lane was, the stone was very different than the stone at Bluebell. And I have to assume that they were quarried right next to the site. And Bluebell being on the opposite side of the valley as from Walnut Lane Golf area, the stone must have changed slightly. The Walnut Lane Golf building was much darker stone and slightly smaller stone than this one, which I found really, really interesting. I doubt those ruins are there anymore. This thesis was written in 1997, so the ruins are probably gone as well. And Kitchens Lane, this is one of my favorite guard boxes, which unfortunately somebody decided to burn down, but it's obviously on the site of another structure, which was also on the site of another structure. This was where Kitchens Mill was, as I said before, but you can see this great Centennial guard box that used to be there. And they took that down and built this WPA guard box that's looks like a log cabin. So all of the buildings, except for the toilet buildings, were constructed of Wissahickon schist and log construction for the walls above. And then if they had a gable end like these guard shelters do, that's not connected with the log, they had deckled siding, which is siding that kind of looks like live, what we would call live edge now. So these are, this is the Allen's Lane guard shelter, and you can see the deckled siding at the end here. Each one of the guard boxes had a stove to keep the guards warm, doors, windows, shutters, and a little porch at the front, at one side with a log picnic seat, and then, but most importantly, they each had a telephone. So if people were lost or hurt, they could get themselves to a guard shelter and be taken in, or the guards could be contacted that somebody needs help. There were also telephones along the drive as well. And then one of the really interesting things I discovered that, well, that nobody had realized before is that with each one of these guard boxes is a comfort station. So the one on the top left is across the drive from the Rex Avenue guard shelter. And I have to confess, I'm not sure which one the one below is. But you can see that they also, the toilet buildings also use the clay pipe, the way the Thomas Mill structure did. They hide the entrances with shrubbery, so you can't see people go in and out of them. Although they do have those stairs leading up to the site, so you know they're there. And the doors to the men's and women's room are on opposite sides of the building, and this is part of what was dictated. There's very few things that were dictated, but this was some of the stuff that was dictated by the National Park Service. So by the time I came around, I call this slide 60 years of being unassuming, because they blended so well with the park, people sort of forgot about them. This was the Allen's Lane structure in 1997. So when you come down the hill from Allen's Lane over the bridge, this was just sort of hidden here. Thankfully, they did cut back the shrubbery before I had to do my surveys. But so I started my thesis, like I said, I guess the fall of '96. And it was suggested to me by the historic preservation officer of Fairmount Park, because there was a butting of heads going on amongst people. Some felt that we should let them disappear because then it'll bring the romantic, picturesque Wissahickon back. And these were sore thumb on Forbidden Drive. And then other people thought, well, that's crazy. These are great little buildings. But what was really interesting is that nobody really knew about them, knew their history. Except for I got to interview some elderly members of the Friends of the Wissahickon who either had been around at the time they were constructed or knew people who'd been around at the time they were constructed. I got really lucky in that sense that I got some almost first degree information. And that reminds me of something I didn't mention before. The Frances Ballard coming up with those landscape plans on her own. There's no physical documentation that says she did that on her own, but I heard it from one of these elderly members of the Friends of the Wissahickon who has since passed on. And that seems to be the standard belief. He wasn't the only one who believed that. So what's really remarkable also is that even though they were in this horrific condition, every time I'd walk up to one of the shelters to do my work, somebody would be sitting on them, hanging out, watching the river, or stretching. They were obviously loved, even though there was a group of people who hated them. So this was the Lincoln Drive structure in '95 and the Kitchens Lane toilet building in '96. Bill's Mill, the picnic shelter actually isn't in terrible condition at that point. It needed a new roof, but otherwise was okay. The toilet building, on the other hand, I actually I have a quote in the thesis about the rooflessness of this structure makes it easier to survey. So for every building, I did these condition sheets that were very, very general, just saying it was, something was in good condition or fair condition. I drew a floor plan of each one, and made a note of if there was any physical archival documentation where it was, where I found it, and what was it. Because as I mentioned before, archival documentation is almost impossible to find with the WPA. So then I went and found, I decided since their construction was so similar, I could do a really thorough survey of just one structure, and I chose the Allen Lane structure. As you can see in the upper left, they've taken some of the shrubbery away for me to be able to do my condition assessment. So I did a graphic condition assessment, photo documentation of the conditions. You can see here that it's quite bad on the interior. There was a hole in the roof where this flashing has the pile of debris on it, and you can see the rot over by the edge of the chimney, and the level of graffiti on the inside was really really tragic, because this was they were exposed board walls and people just carved their graffiti into them, no less magic markered them. And then I gave them treatment recommendations on how to repair them, including how to re-roof them, how to point them. I did mortar analysis. I pretty much came up with the sand in the mortar came from the Wissahickon. So they dug the sand, their aggregate, straight from the creek. And I gave them details on how to reconstruct the logs if they needed to. And one of the amazing things is that this never happens, but people took my thesis and used it. So the first building they started on, which is the top left, with people with shovels pulling off the shingles, was the Rex Avenue Comfort Station. And this was spearheaded by a member of the Friends of the Wissahickon, who also funded my thesis, believe it or not. Nobody gets their thesis funded, but he wanted these saved so badly. His name was Ed Stanton, and he apparently just passed a couple of years ago. But he was instrumental in starting this, and he got volunteer labor up. They restored the buildings using the original mortise and tenon construction, and they put back wood shingle roofs. And they even got so involved and so interested in this that they bought a portable sawmill to mill the logs from the Wissahickon right on site. So here we can see them in action. And you can see this is the Rex Avenue before and after. And somebody built a new bench. This is the Kitchens Lane structure, and they got a new bench for it. They put in plexiglass windows with fake muttons. People couldn't smash the windows. The Lincoln Drive structure. Thomas Mill. I think this is the Rex Avenue toilet building and the Rex Avenue guard shelter. There's a couple more charts of shelters, because who could not love these shelters? Unfortunately, this is Kitchens Lane shelter. And as I briefly mentioned, somebody burned down the log aspect of it. So they've made it an open shelter. And this is just a tribute to, this is Ed Stanton, and this is Chris Palmer, who helped me tremendously. And in this bottom photo, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you can see a very young me holding a dog. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you, Kate. Let me start with some very general questions. Where can we find and read this thesis?
Oh, it's University of Pennsylvania publishes all of the graduate theses. So you can search Cowing WPA in the Wissahickon and then find it on, there's an article that I wrote for a conference. And if you get on the University of Pennsylvania's site, that's where the thesis would be.
Okay. I mean, that's kind of how I found it. I didn't even know your name. I think I just searched, WPA structures in the Wissahickon and made my way to it.
It's the first thing that comes up.
Yeah, there haven't been any more. And then, two different questions. What most surprised you in your research? And then what is your favorite structure?
My favorite structure was the Kitchens Lane structure before it got burned.
Oh.
And I think now it's probably the Allens Lane structure, because that's the one I worked with most closely. Actually, no, I take that back. The Lincoln Drive 10 box. It's kind of magical. I forgot the first half of that.
in your search?
Well, a couple things really surprised me. One was how involved the Friends of the Wissahickon were the whole way through the life of this. Being supporting the project with money, with materials, proposing the project, and I was so struck by the fact that these people took responsibility for the people that they brought over. They could have just turned their backs and been like, all right, go find work. We can't. Didn't even know how were. It just, for some.
And while we're talking about Allen's Lane, exactly.
And go over the bridge, make a right, and it's right there.
Is that Allen's Lane or Mount Airy Avenue?
I think it's Mount Drive in the park.
Okay.
That's its historical name. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. And let's see. These are not totally in order, but is the Thomas Moran painting that you showed, is that in a collection in Philadelphia?
Oh gosh, I wish I knew that. I just found it randomly online.
Okay.
I should give credit to the people who have contributed in. Gave me a ton 1998 exhibit, which I also spoke at, and then various, FNAM and those sort of people, those sort of archival organizations. Some of them I don't remember off the top of my head because it was 25 years ago, but this presentation, Chestnut Hill Conservancy was critical in finding these images. But other ones I have.
Meaning of 10 box.
There were telephones in each one of the guard boxes, and apparently that was the 10th telephone.
Okay. I didn't know if it was, the 10th something, but
yeah, it was the 10th air spot that had a telephone.
Okay. And then is the Harper's Meadow structure that you showed earlier on Forbidden Drive across from this Cedar House, or is
Yes.
it gone?
No, that's
it. Okay. And does that outdoor oven still exist?
That I don't know. That wasn't part of my project, and I tried to stay as focused as I could. So
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. Maybe we should go look for it.
Yeah.
This is a question that was not in the chat box because it's from long. I mean, until what year? Do you know?
1972. The Fairmount Park Guards were disbanded in 1972.
Oh, so throughout the system.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Someone noticed that on the way up Bells Mill Road toward Roxborough, about halfway up edge of the road foundation. Do you know anything about that?
No, I suspect it was an old mill building. Actually, everybody can close their eyes. I'll scoot back to the map real fast. Close your eyes so you don't get sick.
Dizzy.
Um, yeah, the map doesn't go that far over.
Yeah. I mean, I've noticed there's also a small foundation in the Andorra Meadow area, sort of on the downslope between the meadow and the edge of the meadow and Bell's Mill Road, but I've never figured out what it is.
Yeah, there were so many mills that it's just impossible to tell. This was a, you know,
Yeah. Let's see. Another question. Do these structures show up on the new FOW Park app? Maybe that's a question for Ruffian
yeah, that's not
or Noah.
knowledge base.
Are you?
I don't know that we have all of the shelters mapped off the top of my head. But we do have a lot of the larger sites identified in the app.
Okay.
But as far as all of the former stations, you know, what's there currently is on the map. But
And can we access that app through your FOW website?
oh, you sure can.
Okay.
You can. And you can find links to where you download it, either in the App Store for iPhone or in the Android store now. I believe we are
Okay.
launched or imminent launch for the Android version.
Great. Okay. Sounds wonderful. Let's see. Tim Greenwood, I guess, says he read an interesting book that said the CCC and the WPA were meant to put young people to work to avoid social upheaval. Have you heard
Yes, that I have heard that about the CCC.
that? Okay. So that tended to be more younger, unskilled workers. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about whether or not the WPA was also to prevent social upheaval, but I've definitely heard that about the CCC, which
kind of makes sense if it was catered to people that might be willing to go far away from home for a little while.
Right.
Okay. Another question: is there a central WPA archive for research, such as Library of Congress?
The problem with the WPA research is that the WPA gave the sponsors back all of the information. So there's very little at the Library of Congress. I did spend time there. I found a letter from George Woodward demanding that this project get stopped. But that's pretty much all I found there. All of the plans, everything went back to the sponsors, and Fairmount Park for a long time, thank goodness this is no longer the case, but for a long time threw away any document over a certain age.
Oh boy.
So yeah.
Okay, let's see. Cliff says, I thought I read once that the structure in Andorra was a greenhouse, or I may be making that up.
No, you're not making that up. It wasn't that structure. There was a nursery there before that structure, and the reason it's called Harper's Meadow is named after the man who ran the nursery.
William Harper. Okay. Let's see. Are you familiar with the FOW's 1927 illustrated and informative publication called The Wissahickon Valley Within the City of Philadelphia?
I'm not sure. I have a lot of books about the Wissahickon from the turn of the 20th century forward. I don't know if that's one of them.
Okay. And then have you thought of publishing this in a book such as Arcadia, the Arcadia Press, or something?
That would be fun. I think Arcadia has already done Chestnut Hill, and maybe even the Wissahickon.
They've been two on, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they have, right? Done the Wissahickon.
Yeah, but they don't mind revisiting
Yeah.
Oh, they don't?
different aspects of things. It might be we'd certainly love to sell that
Along the Wissahickon, isn't that the little book?
along the Wissahickon. True.
Yeah.
Here,
Mhm.
an
But
Arcadia
something
book?
just
Yeah.
something just about WPA, maybe.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, this is about materials. Were you able to determine whether materials other than schist were locally sourced, such as the timbers and roofing, and was concrete used for floors?
The wood was all locally sourced. It was felled in the Wissahickon. That became a fair controversy because people were complaining that the projects were taking too long. But of course, the whole point was for the projects to take a long time so people could stay employed. And the floors were stone, and I'm sure they were set in concrete, yeah, because concrete was around by that point.
Let's see. How do you find the sponsors' names?
I'm confused.
Yeah.
Oh, the sponsor of the WPA project. I think, I mean, for me, it was Fairmount Park, and then with more research, I discovered that the Friends of the Wissahickon were a huge part of it, and probably paid more than the Fairmount Park did, actually. But I don't know how you would find it for somebody else. I mean, I would assume I would start with the municipality where the building is located, because the municipality was often the sponsor.
Then we have, these are more comments than questions, but somebody says some of the WPA records were, or WPA stuff was published in the Congressional Record, which can be found in libraries that are repositories for government documents.
Oh, cool.
And there was also a Federal Writers Project Guide to Philadelphia published the Wissahickon during the era these buildings were constructed. So that link has been posted by Tim in the chat room if you want to grab that.
The Friends of the Wissahickon did not approve of that hike, the hike book, the 4 hikes in the Wissahickon. They felt it did not show the natural beauty of the Wissahickon.
Oh, it was too recreational or something.
Yes, I'm not sure.
Okay. Too many hot dog stands.
Yeah.
Did I miss anybody? I think I got all the questions. Just trying to see if, yeah. Kate, do you just want to mention which of these structures will be part of the tour, the walking tour, as you understand the loop?
My understanding, and I haven't heard the final route, but my understanding is that would start at Rittenhouse Town. I assume go up to Bluebell Picnic Shelter and then walk around to Kitchens Lane and back.
Yes. Bob Thomas wants to chime in. Please be our guest.
Yes, that's correct. We'll be meeting at Rittenhouse Town, going up to the Bluebell Hill Picnic Shelter, working our way up to the Kitchens Lane Bridge, and then seeing the 2 structures at Kitchens Lane, coming back to the 10 box on Forbidden Drive, and then returning to Rittenhouse Town. And the instructions will also give public transportation access, which is pretty easy to Rittenhouse Town.
Great. And there will be promotion and registration for that starting soon. Yeah, Leah says tickets will be on sale soon, and stay tuned. So, I through both Conservancy and Friends of the Wissahickon. So just pay attention to those e-blasts that you get. Anybody else?
Kate, I just want to thank you very much, both as an architect and also as a traveler in Wissahickon. This is just delightful.
Oh, thank you.
And on behalf of everyone else, there are a few accolades in the chat function as well. But thank you very much, and I'm so glad that I tracked you down.
Thank you for tracking me down. This was a lot of fun to revisit.
Good. All right. Well, we look forward to the tour, and thanks everybody for attending. This is a very nice crowd.
Thank
Thanks
you,
so much
everybody.
for organizing this, Jean.
Sure.
And Ruffian for partnering with us. And Kate, thanks again for this wonderful presentation. Bob, we look forward to your walking tour.
Good, and I look forward to seeing as many people as can be accommodated.
All right. Well, thanks everybody, and good night. You can still have dinner.